Hi guys, it's Thorn. It's been a while. I'm gonna ramble, I think, for a second. I didn't outline this, but it's been heavy on my mind. Oh, that sounded super evangelical, what I just said right now. It's been on my mind for a long time. I've written things about this. A lot of my scholarly work has been about this sort of thing. But it's really come to the fore for me since I've started reading cards at our local witch supply shop that opened a few months ago. And that's the subject of class and paganism and witchcraft. And by that I mean socioeconomic class. There are some other folks on YouTube who've talked about class. I know another pagan blog has. I've brought it up a couple of times, and that's something that's kind of, I think, on the periphery in a lot of other folks' videos. But since I've started working at this shop as a reader, and being in the sort of position where I'm routinely asked to represent a community in certain ways, right? I mean, that's not officially what I'm doing, but just by virtue of being public about one's craft, one becomes representative in some ways. And by itself, that's really problematic, just like all on its own for anybody. But I've noticed interesting dynamics in working at the shop. And I suspect that these are things that other people also experience. It's just a question of context. And the way... Okay, I'm going to be sort of imprecise here. But I said in a blog a few weeks ago, I was writing about definitions of witchcraft, and I sort of was being glib when I said this, but it's really become true for me in a lot of ways. I made the comment that witchcraft, specifically, as opposed to other kinds of magic, or as opposed to the kinds of like metaphysical New Age practices. Many of you have seen me draw a line between witchcraft and paganism and the New Age. And there are specific reasons for that. But one of the things I said was that witchcraft occurs lower down on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Witchcraft tends to be, and these are tendencies, right? You may not fit in this box, and that's fine. Witchcraft tends to be more concerned with practical application, right? Talking to the dead, making somebody fall in love with somebody else, paying bills, getting money, getting jobs, sort of like real world, tactile, necessary things, right? Folks who are more into the metaphysical side of things tend to be more concerned with, like Maslow's hierarchy would call it self-actualization, right? People very concerned with working through long-term sorts of emotional problems, or being their best selves, or I don't know. I don't mean to be dismissive when I phrase things this way, but things that occur higher up on the pyramid. Like once your basic needs have been met, you then have the luxury to pursue sort of like higher endeavors, right? So that's what I mean when I say witchcraft occurs lower down on the pyramid. I see this manifest in one way in particular working at the shop, and that's in the sort of tarot readings that I do, the sorts of clients I get in the shop versus the ones I get online. The folks who I get online often have issues related to purpose in life, spiritual direction, meaning, connections to God, right? Like things that are important, but they're not critically important. They're not important in the way that, like, oh, I might be evicted from my apartment kind of important is, you know what I'm saying? The folks who come into the shop have the sorts of concerns that don't even begin to touch on those other things. They're concerned with, oh, my ex-husband is trying to take my kids away and I can't afford a lawyer. What's the judge going to say that day that I have to be in court? Those are the kinds of readings that I get in the shop. Things about one of my kids is mentally ill or physically ill, and we can't afford doctors. What can I do to keep this under control? Or, what's going to happen with my father who's dying of cancer? It's stuff that is, for lack of a better word, it's gritty, and it's pretty rare that I get somebody who wants to know about their connection to spirituality or, I don't know, like where to find meaning in the world, that sort of thing. People are concerned about different things, and these concerns are tied up really clearly in class. When you have the luxury of affording housing and healthcare, and I don't say the word luxury to imply that I agree that these things should be luxuries, but the reality is that they are for most people. Most people can't afford to own a house or go to college or, whatever. Like, the list goes on. When those sorts of basic needs aren't being met, like crystal healing stops being a priority. Like you're not worried about working through your shadow, or like whatever sorts of language that those of us in these kinds of communities might use. And it's not a judgment. Like this isn't me like shaming people with money or anything like that. But the difference between communities that occupy a position of privilege versus those that don't is really striking. And paganism broadly seems to have all types. Anyway, it's something that's been on my mind lately. I wonder about my ethical position as a tarot reader working in the shop versus online. Like, I'm obviously not qualified to do something like offer medical or legal advice, and yet I'm repeatedly put in the position where I'm asked to provide input, right? And technically it's not from me, right? It's from the cards, but that's a really blurry line. And I think ethical questions arise regardless. Like that's something to think about. And I feel like class is something that we in pagan and metaphysical communities often avoid talking about. Like, we don't like talking about this stuff. I delivered a paper at the American Academy of Religion's National Conference a couple of years ago, specifically about class, and I was looking at traditions in the African diaspora in the United States, but I was talking about class, and I remember I got a couple of questions that were essentially like, why are we talking about this? I think it's something that's just really difficult to broach for a lot of people, and I think it's important that we have these conversations. And one of the weaknesses, I think, in our communities, and I'm being really broad here deliberately, like whether you identify as a pagan or a witch or New Ager or whatever, I think one of our weaknesses sort of collectively is that we're not very good at dealing with real suffering and real struggle. A lot of older established religions, like Christianity, Christianity has institutions in place for dealing with things like this, right? We're talking about hundreds of years of history dealing with people dying and people being sick and people suffering, and you've got whole like institutions dedicated to matters of theodicy, right? And anyway, like, we really don't have that in a lot of ways. Again, regardless of which segment of the community you occupy. And I think it's a weakness in some ways. In other ways, we're different kinds of religions, and maybe that isn't something we should be trying to occupy. I don't know. But I'm very curious about this subject, and I'd like some input from other folks. How does your pagan or witch or New Age religious tradition help you, or does it, cope with sort of like the day-to-day awfulness of just trying to make it in the world, you know? Because I think we collectively do a lot of spouting about things like karma and the threefold law and like all this other stuff, and oh, you're here to learn lessons, or the gods are testing you, or whatever. But like, none of that stuff really seems to apply when somebody's dying of cancer, or when you're losing your home, or your kid is dying or mentally ill. Like there's a lot of things that our traditions don't touch on in substantial ways. So this is something that I wrestle with, and I know other people wrestle with it too. So this is me starting a dialogue. Anyway, I hope everyone is well. Things are fine here, just busy. Oliver is here. So that's it.